What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with Judeo-Christian values and real-world first-hand experience. Today's topic is going to be on semi-automatic rifles for hunting. Before I plug in the bio, make sure that you are liked and subscribed to the podcast if you want to be, so you get future content. With that, the bio, and then by God's grace, the main body of the episode. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image. A follower of Jesus Christ. A simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. So let's talk about semi-automatic hunting rifles. Now, if you think we're going to talk about the AR-15 and the AR-10, we're not. Now, We've already done an episode on the AR-15 for hunting. Today, I don't plan on discussing the AR-15 or the AR-10 or, like an M1A, really any of the military rifles. Sure, you can kill a deer with an M1A, but it's big and heavy and kind of unwieldy. Today, we're going to be talking about semi-autos designed for hunting and field use, with maybe one kind of crossover because it's not really a military law enforcement gun. At least it wasn't initially designed that way. But it's not really a traditional hunting gun. And if you're wondering what that is, I guess I'll just keep you in suspense until we get to it. But if you think that this hunting with a semi-automatic is a new thing, like that came about with the AR-15 being so modular, you're 100 years off. The Remington Model 8 came out in 1905 and has been used for well over 100 years. In fact, I had heard this and I looked it up to verify it, and apparently the National Museum of American History has Theodore Roosevelt's Remington Model 8 made in 1906, and he hunted with it. Theodore Roosevelt was known as, quite the outdoorsman and hunter. Again, this is not anything new. The Remington Model 8 is a very good gun. I'm not a gun collector, but I think it would be really cool to have a Remington Model 8 and 35 Remington, which, if you don't know, 35 Remington, I believe, was designed and developed for the Remington Model 8. I would love to have one of those. It was such a good gun, I do believe it saw some law enforcement use back in its day, especially in that kind of gangster era. But it was designed as a hunting sporting rifle, and it's great for that. And again, people have been hunting with these for well over 100 years ago. These were already fairly well-established older guns in the Great Depression. So again, if you think that the idea of hunting with a semi-automatic is new, it's certainly not new, especially not here in America anyway. I should mention a caveat I forgot in the beginning. This is going to be talking about semi-automatics for medium to large game. Obviously, the Ruger 1022 is great for squirrels and rabbits and things, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking medium to large game, semi-automatic hunting. Now, that was kind of the semi-automatic hunting rifle from days of yore. When I was growing up, the semi-automatic hunting rifle that was common was the 740, and there's a whole line of these, the 74, the 740, the 7400. Any of those basically built on that line. The 740, again, when I was the up-and-comer in hunting, learning to hunt and things like that when I was a young boy in the South, that was probably the most common, not military one. SKSs were super common because they were very cheap. Was kind of the poor man's redneck hunting rifle, and it worked rather well. But the classy, nice semi-auto hunting rifle of my era and a little bit before, we're talking 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, I guess, was the 74, 7400. These are exquisitely built and beautiful hunting pieces. Every bit as pretty and as elegant and as beautiful as the semi-automatic Remingtons of the day, the 1100s, the 1187s, with the nice wood stock and the nice, even some of them have scrolling and things like that, or an etching on there of a hunting scene. You're talking about a fine piece of American craftsmanship when America turned out fine pieces of craftsmanship. It's a beautiful hunting implement. Again, every bit as elegant as going into the pheasant fields with, a Remington Model 1100. Which are beautiful, beautiful guns. That Remington Model 740 or 7400 is a beautiful, fantastic hunting rifle. They handle, for me, every bit as good as an 870, and I love the way an 870 handles. I should mention, I can't mention this one without, I know this is semi-auto, but the 7600 is probably more popular. That is a slide action or pump action. But we're talking about semi-autos today, but just know that that one exists and is also a very good gun. And some states don't let you hunt with a semi-automatic for for deer or whatever, so that might be your next best option. However, the 7400 is a beautiful, elegant, good hunting rifle, and unlike, an AR, it's designed for hunting, and you can get it in a lot of the more classic hunting cartridges. It's probably most common in a 30-06. Probably second most common is 270. You could also get it in 308, and I believe quite a few other common hunting calibers. It's fantastic. And it's most semi-automatic hunting rifles are kind of kludgy and big compared to most hunting rifles. Like, let's say even a good sleek AR-10 is quite a bit bigger and bulkier and more unwieldy for hunting, in my opinion, like climbing through brush and over logs, than your classic slim bolt-action rifle is going to be. But not a Remington 7400. I think they're every bit as sleek as most bolt-action rifles are. They're nice, they're handy, and that's really the defining characteristic, I believe, of a hunting semi-auto versus a military semi-auto pressed into hunting service. Again, sure, you can hunt with an M1A if you want to lug around a 12-pound rifle with an optic. Hopefully you don't need a 20-round magazine. Not that you shouldn't be allowed to have one, but if you're going for hunting, 5 rounds in the magazine is a good way to go. Since you don't need a giant magazine, well, you kind of trim all that off. Anyway, the point of that is these are a lot sleeker in general hunting implements than, like, let's say, an AR-10 built for hunting. And the Remington 740 certainly is that sleek, elegant hunting rifle. Now let's talk about another one, kind of that era, that came and went, and it still has a really classic following. I kind of wish they would bring it back, but it is the Deerfield carbine. Think of a Ruger 1022 that's been doing a lot of push-ups. It's basically the Ruger 1022 beefed up the 44 Magnum. And 44 Magnum out of a carbine is quite a deer hammer. The Ruger Deerfield carbine is a light, handy hunting rifle, much like a 1022 is, again, just a little bit bigger, but the same kind of feel and fit. It's a great gun, the Deerfield carbine. I assume they stopped making them because they cost too much, but people really like those guns. So if you get a chance to get one of those at a good deal, and you do kind of deep woods or drive hunts or spot and stalk hunting in thick timber, thick brush, they're fantastic, fantastic guns. The Ruger Deerfield carbine and 44 Magnum, and as far as I'm aware, that's the only caliber that gun was ever made in. It'd be cool if they came back out with a new one in 44 Magnum and 357 Magnum. And in stainless steel. That would be pretty cool. Which brings me to another one in kind of this 80s, 90s era. Real cool classic gun. And again, this is one I was talking about in the beginning. I said I was going to keep you in suspense. And that's the Ruger Mini 30. Now, the Mini 14 was designed by civilians. It did get some military, I believe, and law enforcement contracts. Well, in fact, I know it got law enforcement contract because I used one of those as a law enforcement officer, and I quite liked it. But it was really designed as the ranch rifle, as a semi-automatic kind of working man's rifle. Now, the Mini 14, called that because it's a scaled-down version of the M14. So, like I said, the M1A is kind of big and heavy. The Mini 14 is not, but the Mini 14 is in 223. And if you're going to get a specialty semi-auto hunting rifle, to me, the 223 ain't it for deer and things like that. For coyotes and things, that's fine. But for deer and larger, if you can get a better cartridge, I think you should. And the Mini 30 is basically that platform, a small, handier M14 chambered in 7.62 by 39. Which, if you get good ammo, not the crappy, Wolf Full Metal Jacket ammo, but the good soft point controlled expansion hunting ammo in 7.62 39, it's very similar to 30-30. In my opinion, not quite as good, but pretty close, and certainly much better, in my opinion, than 223. So, you can get that Mini 30 in 7.62 by 39, quite a bit lighter and handier than most of your actual battle rifles are going to be. If you wanted one for kind of mostly hunting on a ranch, you You have damage permits, so you can shoot deer that are eating crops and things like that. So it might be a quick shot, but also you might want something with a little bit more firepower when you're out alone on the ranch. To me, that's kind of a good crossover, but I wouldn't really put it in the military law enforcement category, although it was adopted briefly by some departments, and you could argue it's a military police firearm. It kind of is in this weird in-between, and it's a good gun, so I'm going to throw it in here. Now, the real elegant one, the one that, like, if your daddy had money, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you were kind of affluent in hunting back in my era, at least I thought of them that way, and you wanted a nice high-end semi-auto hunting rifle, that was the Browning BAR. Not the military Browning BAR, which you might be familiar with, but it stands for the same thing, Browning Automatic Rifle. But the Browning Hunting Firearms Company. The Browning company you have today that makes the X-Bolt and all that. The Browning BAR, Browning Automatic Rifle. This is a beautiful, elegant, every bit as good a quality in my opinion as like the Browning bolt action rifles. Just a fine piece of craftsmanship. I'm not sure where they're made now. They were for a time, I believe, made in Belgium. But just fantastic, exquisite firearms. And I still kind of think of these in my head as the really nice high-end semi-automatic hunting rifle. They're beautiful, beautiful guns. And they make these in all kinds of good hunting calibers. They make them in your 30-06 and your 270. They also make them up into the 300 Win Mag. I do believe. So if you want a powerhouse semi-automatic rifle, then this might be your best bet here. And unlike a lot of the ones we've talked about thus far, it's still available today. I'm looking on their website right now, and there are a lot of them listed. If you're thinking about building an AR-10, I think you dump about the same amount of money as you would getting a BAR. If you're going to get an AR-10 to have an AR-10 for like your mag or for tactical use or whatever, this is not the same thing. But if you're building an AR-10 for hunting, I think you'd probably be better off with one of these. Instead of getting an AR-10 and trying to adapt it to hunting, just get a hunting rifle that was built that way, a semi-automatic hunting rifle built for hunting. At least it's an option. Do what you want. It's your money. But just know that it exists and it's still available and it's still being made. Because there are that subset of people that still like semi-autos for hunting. Now, I know this has been chambered in a lot of rounds over the years. I just tried to look it up and find like a inclusive list, and I couldn't. I did find that it's chambered all the way up to 300. I said 300 Win Mag before, but it's actually 338 Win Mag, which is even bigger. It even says it's listed in the Winchester Short Magnum cartridges. So again, if you want a specific hunting caliber, like let's say you really like 270, this might be a good option. Or you really want a 300 Win Mag semi-automatic hunting rifle, this might be a decent option. Maybe you hunt elk in Montana and a grizzly bear encounter is not outside the realm of possibility. Might be controversial, but probably a better pick than that AR-10. Because it doesn't matter how many rounds you have in the magazine. I don't imagine you're going to get more than a couple of rounds off at a charging grizzly bear. And a couple of rounds of 338 Win Mag ought to do it. If you can shoot. Anyway, this is a viable option if you want a little bit bigger or a little bit more special hunting round. 308 is a great round. In fact, 6.5 Creedmoor and 308 are my two go-to hunting round calibers. However, you may want a 270 for whatever reason. You may want that 300 Win Mag. You may want that kind of oddball hunting cartridge. And this may give you an option that's available now. You can literally order one on GunBroker, or if you have a decent sized gun store, you're probably not getting one of these at Walmart or whatever, but they are available. You can actually just order one. At least as far as I know now when I'm recording this. And I should mention, this is recorded in September of 2022. At least at this time, it appears they're still making them, and quite a few different models of them. So, that's going to bring me... I kind of tried to do this somewhat in order of kind of the era of these semi-automatic hunting rifles. The last one I'm going to talk about It's perhaps what I would go with if I was going to go with a semi-auto hunting rifle, and I don't own one, but I love the Benelli shotguns so much. The Benelli M1 was one of my go-to shotguns for such a long time, and I now have a Benelli M2. I've tried the Benelli M4, didn't like it. It wasn't a good crossover, a little bit too heavy for my kind of one go-to. You know, if things got really bad and I had to have just one long gun. I think for me it is still be hard to argue against that Benelli M2. It is a fantastic gun. Every Benelli semi-auto shotgun I've ever had has been a good, reliable gun. Benelli also makes the R1, which is their semi-automatic hunting rifle. And I think these are used quite a bit more in Europe, ironically, than here. But they are really cool. They're kind of, I think, the next generation of semi-auto hunting rifles. It'd be hard-pressed for me to pick. If I was going for like nostalgia, probably the 740 or the 7400. But if I was going for pure, probably best semi-auto hunting rifle, it'd be between the Browning BAR and the Benelli R1. But just because I like the Benelli shotgun so much and I'm so familiar with how they operate, I think I'd probably go with an R1. These, like the BAR, are still being made, at least at the time of this recording. They're listed on the website. List them in 30-06. It also lists in the drop-down, I don't know if all these are currently being made, but they list them in 30-06, 300 Win Mag, 308, and 338. And I don't know what real-world street prices are on these, but they are a couple $100 cheaper than the listed price on Browning's website for the BAR. Again, Brownings are beautiful, elegant guns. The Benellis, I think, are really cool looking. If it was just a beauty contest, I'd probably go with the Browning. Again, I trust the Benelli shotguns, the semi-automatic shotguns, so much that would probably be one of my top picks. They list them in the nice, pretty walnut, also in the synthetic stock if you're more of a utilitarian hunter. But just know that that rifle exists. I don't think a lot of Americans even know about the Benelli R1, but it is fantastic. I got to play with one at SHOT Show, whatever the last SHOT Show was pre-COVID, back when I was still kind of big in the industry and the commander of a tactical team. I got to go there for free for my work. Anyway, I got to handle one of those and I was really impressed with it. It was really cool. And I didn't even know it existed, and I'm a big Benelli guy. I like Benellis for my shotguns, so maybe you're not aware of its existence. So I'm going to kind of wrap this up with a philosophy of why would you even want a semi-automatic shotgun? Well, what's that saying is common now? Well, because America. Like, why not? And that's a valid argument. If you like semi-autos, if you're used to semi-autos, which I am, why not? Sure, pump action shotguns are good, but if I don't have to pump it, why am I going to bother? Same with a rifle. I like bolt action rifles. In fact, my go-to hunting rifles are bolt action because they're even lighter and handier than these semi-autos. But if you're talking about a 7-pound, bolt action rifle versus a semi-auto that's about 7 pounds, why not go with the semi-auto? There's some reasons you may or may not want to do that. A bolt action is certainly going to be easier to maintain in general. But it really depends on how you hunt. And growing up in the South and where everything on the East Coast is pretty much private land, or if it's public land, there's so many hunters on there, you kind of don't want anything to do with it. In most places east of the Mississippi, there's maybe some places in Maine or West Virginia where that's not the case. But where I grew up, pretty much everything was public land. And if you didn't own a farm or know somebody that owned a farm, if you were a poor boy in the South without much private land of his own or any to hunt on, if you could hunt at all, you were probably sitting on a stand. Because it's not like out here where I have, literally millions of acres of national forests that I can go hunt on. And I could walk for days and days and weeks and months on public land. All that to say, there are a lot more ways to hunt than just sitting on a deer stand. If you like that, that's fine. I grew up hunting that way, and I kind of thought that I didn't like deer hunting that much because I don't like sitting in a stand all day, especially when it's freezing cold out. There are a lot other ways to hunt. I like to still hunt and spot and stalk hunt. If you like that kind of hunting and you live in thick cover, if you're doing it on the rolling hills of Idaho, Hell's Canyon, places like that I've hunted, You might still want that longer range or sleeker or lighter, bolt action rifle. But if you're hunting in, the thick timber and denser woods of, let's say, northern Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, which I've been all up in there too, on the Canadian border, or you're the Pacific Northwest or something like that where it's thick and dense, you're probably not concerned about a 300-yard shot because it's hard enough to find a place to shoot 100 yards because there's so much. The forests are just so dense, it would be hard to get a longer shot than that. And you're stalking, and you might get that fleeting glimpse of an elk between trees. Then yeah, one of these might make a lot of sense. Also, there's drive hunting, which I kind of miss. It's sadly illegal in a lot of places, but we're tribal. And, as humans, we historically lived and hunted in tribes. It's kind of a shame that we can't do that anymore. If you have a deer tag to fill a deer tag, you ought to be able to fill that if you do it ethically. I think if you do a drive hunt ethically, it certainly can be a good and fun way to hunt and bond with other members of your tribe. Hunting, in drive hunts, even in America, was pretty common until fairly recently. I know in some little niche places it's still done, but in a lot of places it's either not done for cultural reasons or not done because it's flat out illegal. But in drive hunts, which I do believe, and I've never hunted in Europe, are still fairly common in Europe, drive hunts are quite effective. And for something like that, you may want a semi-auto hunting rifle. Also for something like hog eradication, where you might be able to shoot 4 hogs in a small, tight group, in a short amount of time. Anyway, there's a lot of applications. Certainly you can sit on a deer stand and shoot a deer at 100 yards off a corn pile with a semi-automatic hunting rifle. Sure, of course you can. Like we started with this, 'cause America, why not? But these really shine in other applications like spot and stalk and still hunting or drive hunts, or where you might want that crossover defensive gun, but you're primarily hunting, like let's say on the Mexican border where things can get a little shady. Up on the Canadian border, like in the Montana area where a grizzly encounter is not unheard of. Anyway, there's a lot bigger world out there than just, a bolt action rifle for hunting. And again, that's my go-to hunting rifle, so I'm not putting it down. Also, there's other semi-automatic hunting rifles than just hunting with your AR, which is super common nowadays. And I'm glad. Anything that gets another generation and more hunters in the woods, I'm all about it. But if you think semi-automatic hunting rifle, don't think that you are only relegated to that AR-15 or AR-10. There's a lot bigger world out there. And I think a lot of the people coming into this, let's call it gun culture 2.0, that have only ever known ARs and Glock 19s, there's a big world out there of beautiful wood and walnut and blued steel hunting rifles that are also semi-automatic and are nice and light and handy. And if you try one, you may just really, really like it. With that, I want to say thanks for listening to this episode of Gunfighter Life. Before I throw out that tactical tip, I just want to mention, don't forget to check out goodshepherdtraining.com, goodshepherdtraining.com. Tactical tip of the day. I know hunting season, it's September when I'm recording this, end of September. It's coming on pretty hard for a lot of the country. One of the patrons just asked me about hunting tips, and here's a tip. There's a lot of different ways to clean animals. If you live, again, east of the Mississippi, you're probably within some kind of distance where you can drag a deer whole to a road, in most cases. Most people back there either just drag the deer or gut the deer and drag the deer to their truck, to whatever. If you're hunting out west, the boneless method, the gutless method, is a real good method. I'm not going to try and do that in audio. But if you're back east and you're going to gut an animal to drag it or gut an animal to hang it, and you're doing it on the ground, meaning you shot a deer and you've got quite a ways to drag it, and maybe it's warm and you don't want it to spoil, first of all, slit that throat, get the blood out. That helps. Second of all, gutting that deer, a little tactical tip for that, just find a stick. That depends on the size of your deer, but let's say 18 inches is a good length, and break that stick off and shove it in between what would be behind the knees on the back legs. There's that little gap there usually where the tendon runs and the meat runs. You can put a stick in there and prop those legs open, which makes it a lot easier to gut that deer. Just kind of open up that gut cavity. And a lot of times, especially if you're dragging, depending on uphill, downhill, whatever, you can just pull that deer forward and those guts will kind of stay in place. You kind of just reach up in there and pull everything out. I like to eat the heart and the liver, so I'll keep those in general if I can. Keep in mind they spoil fairly quickly. Anyway, that's kind of your tactical tip of the day. Get that stick to prop those legs open. It does make gutting that deer quite a bit easier when you are on the ground. That's your tactical tip of the day. It's going to come from Psalms 37. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday.